Welcome to this month's Alumni Conversation. Our theme for today is human rights and land in post-apartheid South Africa. In the country, March is known as Human Rights Month. And on the 21st, we gather to commemorate the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, where 69 people were killed and over 180 were wounded. These protesters had gathered in Sharpeville to protest against past laws and a whole host of other indignities that Black people were subjected to during apartheid. At the heart of the discontent of the people were land struggles, and these continue to feature very prominently in popular discourse. What has become clear in these contemporary debates is that land is not just a commodity. Land is intrinsically tied to people's identities, and it is also at the very heart and essential in the recognition or realization of human rights. Today, I'll be chatting with Nolundi Luwaya, who is the director of the Land and Accountability Research Center here at UCT, and Declan Dyer, who's the SRC president. Welcome to both of you. My first question to you is around the meaning of human rights in post-apartheid South Africa. What does that mean to you personally, and what does it mean for the work that you do, and in your case, Declan, for the people that you represent at the university? I'll start with you, Nolundi.
Thanks, Asanda. I think, human rights is a complicated issue in South Africa. And so for me personally, it represents a bit of a contradiction, a bit of a tension. So in part, human rights obviously really signify for me the aspirational values that are enshrined in the Constitution, the idea of the type of society that one is working towards. And so, this kind of movement towards an improvement, a change, and a better life, for the mass of South Africans. But at the same time, I think human rights, as I say, are in tension with the reality that actually there are many South Africans for whom the word human rights is quite empty, quite hollow, but also for whom, basic human rights are inaccessible and not delivered upon. So personally, I kind of sit with this contradiction within the term human rights. For the work that I do specifically, human rights, I think, is kind of an umbrella term within which much of the work that we do around land is situated. I do think that the question of land rights is a human rights issue. I think land is a human right entitlement. It's a fundamental one. And so, the kind of concept of human rights offers this umbrella within which to have these conversations about land in South Africa.
Very interesting, Declan.
No, equally fully in agreement that human rights in South Africa is very complex, and I like the phrasing of it as a contradiction, because it really is. Just 2 weeks, in fact a week ago, we saw again the national uprising of students across the country around the right to education, which is very much denied to students in South Africa. So it really is a contradiction, beautifully set out rights in the Constitution, but the lived realities of South Africans is far from what is envisioned in the Constitution. For me, as a representative of students, human rights, particularly again around the right to education, is incredibly important. Many of the challenges that students at university face, not just at UCT but across the institutions, relates to access to education through funding and university capacity, access to land in the form of residences and accommodation, and so on and so forth. So human rights equally plays a very important role in the work that we do as student leaders.
Nolundi, you mentioned this contradiction around land and human rights, land being very essential in attaining some of these rights for people. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that contradiction and maybe share a little bit of the work that you do at LAC in relation to land issues in South Africa?
Sure. I mean, look, I think the kind of anchoring nature of land for me is that it exists in so many various facets of the human experience, right, and of the human rights experience. So not only is land kind of obviously a physical place within which to root oneself, to establish oneself, to secure oneself, but it also has, massive connections with people's history, with people's identity. Land is central to the ability to actually, I would argue, craft your own identity, and to bring forth what it is to exist in a free and democratic South Africa. So I really think the contradiction for me exists in the fact that it is a central tenet of what it is to experience a free and democratic country, but at the same time, we sit in a reality where we have really fallen short in our efforts to try and make that real for every average South African. So, obviously, a kind of a right to property is enshrined in the Constitution, and the work that LARC does specifically is we do work around tenure security. So within Section 25, of the Constitution, which deals with property rights, there is Section 25(6), which is the right to tenure security. And in that work, we work with people who live in what would be termed now the former homeland areas. So these were the areas that Black people were forcibly removed into during the apartheid system, and where their rights to land were severely constricted and restricted. And so what we do at LARC is we work with communities to make sure that their tenure security, their rights to land are made real, both in law, in policy, but also in practice. And so I think, it's a small contribution towards perhaps trying to move the needle on that contradiction, and to bring, the kind of aspirational element a fraction closer to the reality.
And for you, Declan, so Nolundi is talking about the communities that she works with through LARC and the right to property being very central to that. But for you, for students, it's not so much right to property in the same sense that Nolundi has just shared with us, but it's around accommodation issues. Do you want to surface some of the struggles around that for students?
No, for students in the university space, accommodation is land. The residence space provides that comfort, that security, that home away from home for students. Of course, comfort, it's their own space. They can do their academic work. The security of in the most literal sense, where they can secure themselves, their personal belongings and such. And regularly we find challenges where students are without accommodation, particularly at this time of year, and it's inconceivable for a student to perform academically, or even just perform as a person without a secure space to sleep at night. And the anxiety around not having accommodation, essentially being landless, is one that many students are familiar with, as I said, particularly at this time of year. So it's not too far off from the experiences of South Africans and Black South Africans in particular, who are landless in this country, for students to arrive without residence. Once they do, and they find that comfort, that security, they get their space. Of course, they perform in the same way that a person with land, if you get me, will be able to have that space.